The reason that what you said is true, Afritocracy, which are politicians, pundits, professors, performers, and preachers, are so uniformly on the left, so uniformly Democrats, so uniformly pushing a intersectionality agenda, is because they, as Martin, this is what the devil's advocate would say, they, just as Martin Luther King himself Jr. would have done if he had lived long enough, have seen the connection between African-American civil rights and human rights. They're drawing a straight line from Selma to Stonewall. They're saying, whereas Loving versus Virginia was about interracial marriage, the marriage equality movement is about people being able to marry who they love. That's a human right. They're saying that the autonomy of the woman to be liberated from an imposition by society of her having to carry a pregnancy to term that she doesn't want is an extension of the claim for liberty and freedom that people who had been enslaved or pressed into involuntary servitude of one kind or another, indentured, would have also been advocating for. We've grown up, they're going to say. We started with the parochial claims of our race within the context of America's Jim Crow, and we have, in the 21st century, extended that sense of humanity and decency beyond the confines of our race. What's wrong with you people, excuse me, but I'm just being the devil's advocate, who can't see beyond the end of your racial noses and who don't understand that the freedom struggle of Black people and the freedom struggle of women and the freedom struggle of gay people, this is Cornel West preaching to you, brother. He's a Christian. Last time I checked, he was a Christian who had a very different interpretation of Black Americans' historical experience than the one that you've just offered. And I really appreciate you responding to that.
Sure. I take those points, and I've heard them all before. But here's part of my response. I'm going to plant one particular flag, and I'm going to come back to it. It's a very simple, phrase that I use to keep me sort of focused in the moment. And it's this: the designer is the definer. Right? I'll just, a quick tangent just to press this point home. I've heard you talk on a number of occasions about, the concept around social capital, right? And I know that you have unpacked that over the course of decades. Every time someone cites Glenn Loury to talk about social capital and they weave that into their work, they are bringing not just attention, but honor and, in a certain sense, a sense of glory to your work. This was the work that came from your mind. You are the author of it. You defined its terms. You set its concepts. And if that person came back and said, well, I know Glenn Loury says that social capital involves X, Y, and Z, but I'm going to change the definitions of social and capital so that I can use it for my own purposes, but I'm going to call it the same thing, you would say, excuse me, sir, you didn't make that. I did. You don't get to define it, redefine it. I do. And in the same sense, when I think about my biblical worldview and the application of that to issues of political or social import, it's not just for the purpose of moral understanding. It's for the purpose of order. I believe that this world was one that was created. And as such, again, the designer is the definer. So when I think about what marriage is, its definition, I go to Genesis, right? 2:24. One man, one woman, for one lifetime and one covenant union dedicated to one another and the fruit that they bear from that union. When I think about the issue of life, biological sex, so this speaks to the issues around gender ideology. I go to Genesis 1:27. God created male and female, just two sexes, not 64, not 55, just two. So those things anchor me as I, look out into the world. So I understand people say, well, we don't agree with you. And I say, okay, that's fine. But what I also realize is that oftentimes they don't agree with themselves, because the same people who in one breath will say, well, not only women can get pregnant, right? There's pregnant people and people with the capacity for pregnancy. And they'll say, well, yes, men can get pregnant, until you start talking about abortion rights. And then everybody goes back to, well, this is a woman's issue, right? The same people who say, oh, there's more than two genders. Okay, well, you ask them how many there are. No one can give you a consistent definition on, from day to day. So my position and my broad response is, I don't get to redefine terms that I did not create. And part of the reason I don't do that is because as a Christian, I'm not a thief. And I don't believe in robbing God of the glory that comes from acknowledging and appreciating his creation as he created it. And ultimately, I think that worldview has been helpful for me, because now we're in the end game, right? We are arguing. We are literally in the West arguing about whether men can get pregnant. It doesn't get much more fundamental than that. And if we can't get our thinking straight around these issues, all of our future thoughts and words will be in Mandarin or some other foreign language, because someone is going to come in and conquer this land. So.
Oh, okay.
No.
Go ahead.
I'll just bring this thought to a close. So I understand people have different political beliefs, right? And my beliefs are not ones that are primarily shaped by race. I am a black man, of course. And I appreciate that. I love the diversity of God's creation. But ultimately, the question is, like, did we create ourselves? And if so, then we can redefine things. But I would argue that many of the issues that we see, the ones around, depression and anxiety, listlessness and hopelessness, and all of the social maladies, many of those come from people who have grown weary of trying to fight the natural order. They think that they know that they can control their lives, right? But then they get to a particular point and you say, okay, oh, this is not working for me. I told myself I didn't want to have, a husband and children. I didn't want a family. But now I'm 45 and I'm rushing to try to use medical technology in a way to fulfill that desire. So as I said, the designer is a definer. And I think it's important to adhere to that principle.